You keep replaying the moments, searching for the truth you missed. But the person you're grieving was never really there. It was a character you wrote, a ghost you dressed in your own unrelenting hope. You didn't fall in love with her. You fell in love with the story you made about her. You're trying to find the point where it all went wrong, but you can't, because the story didn't go wrong. It just ended, and you are left alone in the wreckage of a world that only ever existed in your mind. The feeling is not a sharp, sudden agony. It's a dull, heavy ache that has settled deep in your bones. It's the silence in your apartment that feels louder than any argument ever could. It's the weight in your chest when you wake up, just before the memory rushes back in, the memory not of a person, but of a presence that is no longer there. You find yourself scrolling through old messages, not to read the words, but to try and pinpoint the exact moment the story you were living in began to dissolve. But you can't find it because the story was never written in their texts. It was written in the spaces between them by you. This ache you feel isn't just a breakup. It's the collapse of a carefully built shelter. This was the structure you unknowingly constructed to feel safe in the world, to feel seen, to finally belong. As Brené Brown teaches, our need for belonging is so primal, so deeply wired into our very being, that we will construct entire narratives to feel connected. You took the scattered bricks of her small attentions, a passing smile, a brief message, a moment of shared laughter, and you built a cathedral around them. You furnished its rooms with your hopes, painted its walls with your projections, and lit its halls with the unwavering belief that this time, you had finally found a home. But as the physician and author Gabor Mate would recognize, this act of creation is not a flaw. It is not a sign of weakness or delusion. It's a brilliant, painful adaptation. A story we create to soothe an older, unaddressed wound of not being seen or chosen in our past. This pattern didn't begin with her. It began in the quiet moments of your childhood when you learned that love was not something freely given, but something you had to earn, imagine, or perform. You were trained to find nourishment in crumbs, to see a feast in a single glance. And so, you became an architect of hope, a master at building worlds from almost nothing. The person you fell for wasn't the foundation. She was merely the plot of land upon which you decided to build. Now, the structure has fallen, and you are left standing in the rubble, exposed to the cold, open air of a reality you had so skillfully kept at bay. The grief is confusing because you're not just mourning her. You're mourning the world you lost, the one where you finally mattered. And so, you walk through the ruins. The initial shock of the collapse has subsided, and now a different kind of reality sets in. It's a specific kind of quiet, the one that follows a storm. The silence they left behind isn't what haunts you in this quiet. It's the deafening resonance of the world you built for them. A world that now stands completely empty but is still, somehow, fully intact in your mind. Navigating your own life now feels like walking through a movie set after the film has been abruptly canceled. The props are all still in place. The coffee cup from your first date, the song you called yours, the jacket left behind. The backdrops are perfectly painted. The future vacation you planned, the holidays you imagined, the simple domestic scenes you replayed in your head. But the life that made it all feel real is gone, because you now understand it was never anything more than a performance. The cruelest part of this haunting is that you are the only one who can hear the echo. It's the echo of your own hope, your own expectations, bouncing off the walls of your creation. You reach for your phone to share a piece of news, and your thumb hovers over a name that no longer represents a person, but a phantom limb. You hear a song on the radio and you don't just feel a pang of sadness for a memory. You feel the crushing weight of the entire universe you attached to that melody. These moments are the props on the set, now stripped of their magic. They are just things, just places, just sounds. The story that gave them meaning has evaporated, and you are left alone on the stage, the sole audience member to a play that has ended. This is the profound loneliness of your grief. You cannot point to a tangible loss that others can understand. You lost a feeling. You lost a potential. You lost a future that you had already begun to live in. The world sees a breakup, a simple parting of ways. But you are experiencing the demolition of an invisible architecture. The pain is so sharp because the disintegration of the fantasy feels like a disintegration of the self. That world was where you felt seen, where you felt you were becoming the person you always wanted to be. Without it, the silence is not just an absence of them. It's an absence of the version of you that existed only within that story. You are the lone curator of a museum dedicated to a life that was never lived. And every echo in every empty room is a reminder that you are the only visitor. To understand why the collapse of this structure feels so catastrophic, you must look beneath the rubble at the foundation itself. Before you ever met her, a blueprint already existed. It was drawn not with ink and paper, but etched into your nervous system during the quiet, lonely hours of your past. This is the part of the story that began long before she entered the room. The character you fell for wasn't a new creation, discovered by chance. She was meticulously cast for a role that has been vacant since your childhood. The role of the one who would finally see you, understand you without words, and fill a specific, aching emptiness that has been your silent companion for years. Think back, not to her but further, to the feeling of being a child waiting for a parent's attention that was always just out of reach, to the feeling of needing to be exceptionally good, or quiet, or interesting to earn a moment of validation. It was in those moments that you learned to create worlds inside yourself to survive the silence. It was then that you learned that love was not a constant presence but a conditional reward. This is the fated blueprint you have been carrying. You weren't consciously looking for a partner to build a future with. You were unconsciously trying to hire an actor to finish a scene from your past. Her arrival felt like destiny, like a missing piece of your soul clicking into place. But it wasn't the recognition of a soulmate. It was the recognition of an opportunity to finally heal that old wound, to prove that you were, after all, worthy of being chosen. This is why the connection felt so instantaneous and profound. You weren't seeing her for who she was. You were seeing her through the filter of what you needed her to be. Every ambiguous word she spoke, you interpreted as the line you had written for her. Every small act of kindness was amplified into a grand gesture of devotion. The intense passion you felt was fueled by the desperation of that younger part of you, the one still sitting in a quiet room, waiting to be seen. You did not fall in love with her. You fell in love with the intoxicating possibility that she could rewrite your own history. The tragedy is that she was never aware of the role she was auditioning for. She was simply a person, living her own story, while you had cast her as the lead in yours, a story whose first chapter was written in the language of childhood loneliness. So, the blueprint was laid down and the actor was cast. But what happens when the actor forgets their lines? What happens when their real self bleeds through the costume you so carefully designed for them? You, as the determined director of this play, did something remarkable. You didn't stop the show. You didn't recast the role. You simply rewrote the script in real time to incorporate their improvisations, calling the mistakes part of the art. You saw the moments where she broke character, but you refused to see them as errors. Instead, you framed them as genius. Her coldness you called mystery. Her emotional distance you labeled independence. Her glaring inconsistencies became depth. A sign of a complex soul that only you were patient and perceptive enough to truly understand. These weren't just overlooked details. They were active reinterpretations, a willful and creative act of blindness fueled by hope. It is like finding a beautiful, handwritten poem, but with several words violently crossed out. Instead of seeing the scribbled ink as a flaw or a correction, you chose to believe it was a deliberate artistic choice, a secret language holding a deeper meaning. You didn't just read the poem. You fell in love with the redactions. You convinced yourself that her unavailability wasn't a sign of disinterest, but a challenge. It was a locked room, and you believed, with every fiber of your being, that you were the only one who had been given the key. The pain of her not being present was numbed by the purpose you found in waiting, in trying, in decoding her silence. This was not foolishness. It was emotional survival. To have acknowledged those red flags for what they were, warnings, signs of incompatibility, evidence of her absence, would have meant admitting that the blueprint was flawed. It would have meant facing the terrifying possibility that the shelter you were building was unsafe, that the foundation was already cracked. That risk was too great. The underlying fear of being truly alone, of having that old wound of invisibility confirmed once again, was far more terrifying than the subtle pain of ignoring the truth. And so, you became the loyal guardian of the fantasy. You weren't just a victim of her behavior. You were a willing participant in the illusion, an artist who used hope as a paintbrush to cover over any part of the canvas that threatened the beautiful picture you so desperately needed to see. This constant work of repainting reality, of curating a flawless narrative, comes at a cost. It is paid for with your own peace. Look back at the feeling you called passion. Describe it. It was a tightness in your chest, a knot in your stomach when you waited for a message. It was a frantic, electric energy that surged through you, a state of high alert that you interpreted as excitement. You told yourself this was the thrill of a deep connection, the intoxicating highs and lows of real love. But that feeling in your chest, the constant uncertainty, the desperate, clawing need for reassurance, wasn't the thrill of love. It was the chronic, exhausting strain of holding a fragile story together with nothing but the force of your own will. You were a bridge, arching yourself over an impossible canyon that separated the reality of the person from the fantasy you had created. What you called passion was simply the feeling of the immense, unending tension required to keep that bridge from collapsing. Every interaction was a stress test on the structure. Every unanswered text was a tremor. Every moment of distance was a gust of wind threatening to tear it all down. Your heart didn't race with excitement. It raced with the fear of the fall. The butterflies in your stomach were not a sign of romance. They were the flutter of a nervous system screaming that something was fundamentally unstable. The moments of relief you experienced, you called them highs. When she finally sent that message, when she offered a small crumb of affection, the tension in the bridge would momentarily ease. You would breathe, not in joy, but in the temporary reprieve from the strain. That relief became your drug. You became addicted not to her, but to the brief cessation of anxiety that her validation provided. The relationship was not a safe harbor. It was a constant storm, and you had learned to call the moments when the waves calmed for a second, peace. This is the deep, bone-wearying exhaustion you feel now. It's not the fatigue of a broken heart. It is the profound burnout that comes from spending months, or even years, performing the invisible, thankless, and unsustainable emotional labor of holding a beautiful lie together. And when the exhaustion finally becomes too much, when the bridge of anxiety inevitably collapses under its own weight, a new feeling settles in. It is grief, but it is a strange, disorienting kind of grief, one that you cannot easily name or explain to others. Feels hollow, confusing, and profoundly lonely. This is because you are not mourning the person who left. You are mourning the person who was never there to begin with. You are grieving a ghost, a character you created, a phantom woven from the threads of your own deepest needs and unrelenting hope. This is the cruelest part of the entire experience. The devastating realization that the love of your life never actually existed outside of you. This grief is the loneliest grief of all. When a real person is lost, there is a shared reality to the pain. Others knew them. Others can validate your memories. There is a funeral where stories are told, a collective acknowledgement of the empty space they have left behind. But here, you are the sole attendant at a funeral for one. You are the only one who knew the person you lost. How can you explain to anyone that you are mourning the way she looked at you in a dream you had while you were awake? How can you describe the loss of a future that only you had seen? You can't. And so you grieve in silence, your pain made invisible by the fact that its object was an illusion. This is why closure feels so impossible to find. You cannot be angry at her for not being the person you imagined. That would be like being angry at a photograph for not speaking back to you. Your anger has no target, so it turns inward, becoming a quiet shame or a deep, lingering confusion. The heartbreak isn't that she's gone. It's the slow, horrifying realization that you were alone in the relationship all along, locked in a beautiful, intricate conversation with yourself. The person you miss, the one you are crying for, is a specter. And the unique, private agony of this mourning process is that you must somehow find a way to say goodbye to someone who was never truly there to say hello. As you sit within this silent, lonely grief, a deeper question begins to surface. If you were mourning a ghost, an actor playing a part, then what role were you playing? In the intricate theater you constructed, she was not the only one on stage. You didn't just write her a part, you wrote yourself one too. You cast yourself as the protagonist, the hero of the story. You were the patient one, the only person with the depth to understand her complexities. You were the rescuer, the only one strong enough to weather her storms. You were the healer, the only one who could love her enough to soothe her hidden wounds. Her perceived brokenness was not a flaw in the story. It was the perfect stage for your character to shine. This role gave you a profound sense of purpose. Her distance gave your patience meaning. Her ambiguity gave your insight value. Every time you chose to stay, to forgive an absence, to interpret a cold shoulder as a cry for help, you were reinforcing your own identity as the savior. The story wasn't truly about her being saved by you, but about you being validated by the very act of saving. You weren't addicted to her love. You were addicted to being needed. The constant effort, the emotional labor, the endless giving. It was the costuming for your role. You kept giving love like it was a rescue rope, believing your worth was measured by how long you could hold on, how much you could endure. Now, with her gone, the stage is empty. The spotlight has gone dark. The devastating truth that settles in is that her departure didn't just leave you without a partner. It left you without a part to play. The person you were in that story, the noble, resilient, all-understanding hero, no longer has a purpose. The grief you feel is not just for her, but for the loss of that version of yourself, a version that felt essential, powerful, and deeply significant. The unmasking reveals a difficult truth. It was never entirely about them. It was about your own deep, unmet need to be essential to someone. Her absence exposes the wound that the savior role was designed to cover. The quiet, underlying fear that without someone to save, you are not needed at all. Understanding the role you played as the savior is only one part of the equation. The next is to understand the powerful force that kept you on that stage, day after day, long after the applause had faded. The truth is, you weren't addicted to her. You were addicted to the story. And the story itself produced a potent drug that kept you coming back. A drug called hope. Each small text after a long silence, every brief moment of connection, every time she let you be the hero, these were not just interactions. They were doses. They were hits of pure, uncut hope that sent a rush of relief through your system, temporarily silencing the gnawing anxiety and confirming that the story was still alive. This hope was a powerful anesthetic. Its primary function was to numb a much older, deeper pain, the quiet, foundational fear that without a story to build, you are fundamentally alone and invisible. The narrative of you as the patient, understanding savior was the prescription you wrote for yourself to manage this chronic ache. As long as the story was active, as long as there was a chance she might change or finally see you, the original wound was kept at bay. You didn't realize that the desperate chase, the constant analysis of her behavior, and the obsessive focus on her were all part of a powerful dependency cycle. You weren't fighting for love. You were fighting to keep your supply of the anesthetic from being cut off. Now, in her absence, you are not just heartbroken. You are in withdrawal. The obsessive replaying of memories in your mind is not a sign of how much you loved her. It is the desperate craving of an addict. Your mind is frantically searching for another hit, scanning the past for any overlooked crumb of hope that might offer a moment of relief. This is why you can't stop thinking about her. It's why the urge to reach out feels so powerful, like a primal need. Your system is screaming for another dose of the narrative that made the world feel stable and your existence feel meaningful. The agony of this phase is so intense because, with the anesthetic of hope gone, you are finally meeting the original pain, raw and unfiltered. The story was never the cure. It was just a way to delay facing the wound it was designed to cover. In the harsh clarity of this withdrawal, as you stand in the wreckage of what you built, a final, profound truth begins to emerge. For so long, you saw yourself as a character in a story that she was directing. You were the passive recipient of her attention or her neglect, a victim of her moods, waiting for her to write the next scene. But look around you now. Look at the rubble, the carefully chosen props, the painted backdrops. A character does not build the set. An actor does not write the script. For the first time, you are able to see that you were never just a character in this story. You were its author. You were the screenwriter, writing hopeful dialogue in the spaces of her silence. You were the casting director, choosing a person not for who they were, but for how well they fit the vacant role you had designed. You were the set designer, meticulously building a world of future promises and shared dreams from the sparest of materials. And you were the director, commanding your own heart to see every inconsistency as depth, every red flag as art. This entire production, from its hopeful beginning to its painful end, was your creation. Recognizing this is not an invitation to blame yourself. Blame is just another dead-end story, another way to cast yourself as the fool. This is about something far more important: recognizing your own power. The same immense creative force that constructed this beautiful, intricate, and ultimately painful fantasy still resides within you. It did not leave when she did. The story collapsed, the pages were burned, but the pen is still in your hand. The profound ache you have been feeling is the grief of an author who became so attached to one story that they forgot they possessed the power to write another. The power was never in her hands. It was never about whether she would choose you or see you. The power was always in the pen. And as you stand here, in the quiet of the aftermath, you can finally feel its weight in your hand again. You can see the blank page that lies ahead. And you understand that the next story does not have to be a fantasy. This time, it can begin with the truth. As you stand there, holding the pen, a final question hangs in the air. If you were the author all along, with the power to write any story you wished, why did you write this one? Why a fantasy so beautiful and yet so fragile? The answer lies in the last, most deeply hidden layer of the wound. This perfect story you wrote served another, crucial purpose. It protected you from the raw, unpredictable terror of being truly seen by a real person. The fantasy was not just a shelter from the rain. It was a gilded cage. It was ornate and beautiful, but its true function was to keep you safe. A fantasy cannot reject your true self. A character you invent cannot wake up one morning and decide your flaws are too much to bear. The ghost you loved could never look at your most vulnerable, insecure parts and choose to walk away. By loving an idea, you remained in absolute control, safe from the single greatest risk of human connection: the risk of being truly known and found wanting. You engineered a love that was perfectly safe because it was never truly separate from you. You created a connection that could not be broken by another person's free will, because the other person was never truly there. This cage, gilded with hope and idealism, was your brilliant and tragic solution to the fear of abandonment that was etched into your original blueprint. The fear whispered that if a real person saw the entirety of you, your neediness, your history, your imperfections, they would not stay. And so, you preemptively protected yourself. You chose a love that demanded nothing of your authentic self because it was not real enough to see it. In your desperate attempt to avoid the pain of being left, you chose a form of profound, solitary confinement. The cage kept you safe from the heartbreak of rejection, but it also, by its very design, locked you out of the possibility of ever experiencing genuine, wholehearted belonging. It guaranteed you would never be left, but it also guaranteed you would always be alone. Stepping out of this gilded cage, blinking in the harsh, unfiltered light of reality, is the final and most terrifying step. The end of this story feels like a death. It is the death of a beautiful possibility, the death of the character you loved, and the death of the heroic role you played. You must allow yourself to mourn this, but it is also something else entirely. It is an awakening. It is the moment the play ends, the lights come up, and you are no longer an actor on a stage, but a person sitting in a quiet theater, finally able to see the truth of your own experience. The pain you feel is the excruciating growing pain of your own consciousness expanding to hold a truth it was not ready for until now. This is the path from story to self. As Brené Brown's work teaches us, true, wholehearted belonging can never grow in the soil of performance or fantasy. It is not something you can construct or control. It demands the raw, terrifying courage to be seen as you are, without a script, without a flattering role, without the gilded cage of an ideal to protect you. The collapse of your fantasy, as the physician Gabor Mate might explain, is a profound and merciful invitation from your own soul. The pain is not a punishment. It is a signal. It is a desperate, loving call from the deepest part of you to stop abandoning yourself in the service of these elaborate fictions. For years, you have been an author, an architect, a savior, anything to avoid simply being yourself. You have been looking for a home in other people, trying to find a reflection in eyes that were never truly looking at you. This entire journey, this intricate construction and its inevitable collapse, was a long and painful detour away from the one person who has been patiently waiting for your attention. And so now you are being called. You are being called to finally put down the pen, to turn away from the empty stage, and to step out of the fictional world you built to keep you safe. You are being called to meet the one person who has been waiting for you this entire time. You. We have created a short, quiet guide to help you map the blueprint of your own wounds. It is not a guide for healing, but a guide for seeing. It's honest and it's free. The link is in the description below. If you saw yourself in this script, it's because you wrote one just like it. But the pen is still in your hand. And on the next page, a different story begins. We write that one somewhere else.